Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Amateur Theory Podcast. This is going to be a little bit different than our typical episodes, a little bit more overtly political. We're all politically
It was
engaged.
bound to happen sooner or later. Let's just peel the Band-Aid off right now.
Yeah, we've slipped in political takes here and there, particularly if you look at our Borat 2 video and things, but never like as political as this is going to be. This is going to be borderline punditry for a bit. But the reason for that is because this week, like maybe 5 days ago at the time of this recording, we had a failed, thankfully failed, violent coup attempt on the Capitol building. That's not the kind of thing that happens all the time. This is a pretty significant, historical event that we're living through. And, I thought this is kind of like the medium we have, and I thought it could be a good way to kind of just not only document the moment, but also kind of get, feelings out and things about it. So the movie that we watched this week is The Great Dictator. I won't spell out the parallels for you about why that might have been chosen. Just reflecting back on this last week, the coup failed. Democracy did not end. No senators or congressmen were murdered, although people did die during this attempt. But you could easily imagine, if we had a little bit, a couple more Crowley and Cruz types in government who are just willing to just sell out the country for the sake of power, if you just have a couple more people, or even if you just imagined the Georgia Senate races had gone a different way, right? Because Kelly Loeffler, who just lost, was one of the people who was contesting the election. So you could imagine, how different would it feel if, this election fraud idea hadn't been repudiated at the ballot box right before, right? It would have felt so different. And the Republican response probably would have been majorly different as well, because, I'm not a mind reader. I don't know how much McConnell, really had truly a change of heart about, kind of Trumpism. But something tells me that a big part of his 180, and people like Lindsey Graham, who has just been parroting all the stuff that Trump has been doing up until now, is probably because they see it as a political loser. Trump has now lost the presidency, the Senate, and the House. And we saw directly in Georgia that this contesting the election thing was politically unpopular. And thank goodness it is. I think that is great. But it's not hard to imagine a world where, that's not the case, and that there is enough support behind this idea of, upending democracy and kind of making, if my guy doesn't win, then, we're going to make them win. And so given that environment, this movie seemed somewhat appropriate. And I just want to say that I didn't choose this movie to say that Trump is literally Hitler. Because if you're not familiar with this movie, this is a movie from 1940. It's a Charlie Chaplin film, and it's a satire on kind of Hitler's rise. So the point I was making isn't that Trump is literally Hitler, even though there were neo-Nazis found at the insurrection. So, that's not a good look. But, getting aside from that, the thing that really struck me about this movie, and I've seen this movie before, so I kind of knew what I was getting into, is that it came out in 1940, which is before we really knew the extent of, the horrors of Nazi Germany. It was, it was before we found out about the Holocaust. And so the betrayal of Hitler in this movie, which, it's, the movie is not generous to him. It's very critical. Very obviously critical of Hitler, but the critiques it make is often that Hitler is, what's his name? in the movie.
Goring, Herman, or are you talking about
the character?
Character's name.
It's not Hitler. It's
it's
like Hinkler.
Hinkler. But it's obviously meant to be Hitler.
Comedic variation.
Hinkler in the movie. But he's kind of portrayed to be this like buffoonish, narcissistic, kind of crazy type character. Stop me if any of that sounds familiar. But it's
the last third of the movie is just him and Mussolini trying to one up each other in like the most ridiculous ways.
And so it kind of shows like the attitude back then of obviously you didn't like the guy, but just the perception of him, you didn't really get to see the full extent of the danger at the time. And so I don't want people to do that here. I know there's a lot of funny things about a guy in a Viking hat, storming the Capitol. There's certainly like the meme potential, but I'm not saying don't laugh. We should all be able to laugh at things, but just don't let that, obscure the seriousness of what happened. Anyway, that's the end of my little soapbox. Just for one minute, just really quick, getting away from any of the political kind of parallels and implications, as we usually do. What did you guys think of the movie, just in terms of as a movie? The Great Dictator. What did you guys think?
Solid film. I've never seen it before, and I've never seen anything by Chaplin before, so this was my first dive into his filmography. And for a film that came out 80 years ago, I think a lot of the comedy is slapstick, but
it holds up surprisingly well.
Yes, it holds up surprisingly well. And even the comedy that isn't slapstick can be like rather clever. Like it can be silly, but silly in a kind of smart way, as pretentious as that may sound. I don't know. But it's a solid film. It's engaging. And I mean, it's, as far as I know, like this is like one of the most, like, I think famous satire films ever made. I'd never seen it before, but I still already knew the like closing monologue scene that he gives. But I think even better than the monologue he gives at the end of the film is the one he gives when we first see his dictator character, like talking in his like gibberish German. And he's like screaming into the mic, and it's like bending backwards.
It's funny to listen to what he's actually saying too, because if you listen to the words, he says things like cheese and crackers and like other little. It's just one of those kind of clever, kind of fun gags in the movie.
Yeah, it's like it's nonsense, but it's nonsense that kind of works in the context.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I feel like it's a film with a lot of great moments and a lot of great ideas. And it's the kind of comedy that it's funny when you're watching it, and then when you think about it, it occurs to you that it's a great idea that they came up with to kind of pull off the joke. That said, and I recognize I'm kind of acclimatized to the faster pace of more modern films. Occasionally I felt like the film halted the pace of its story in order to kind of amount a mild joke that would last like 10 minutes. So it is a little bit, there's kind of a patience element to it, I think, but like it's at its best, it's really worth the payoff. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 2-hour long film, and it didn't necessarily need to be 2 hours long, but fortunately, like, you're not too bored for most of it. Like, it's like, if you don't like one gag, then like, don't worry, it'll end. Another one will come along.
But yeah, I think this is the oldest movie we've talked about on the podcast thus far, and I actually think it holds up better than some of the other older. I mean, the other stuff we watch is Plan 9 from out of 6. I don't know if that's a very fair comparison.
Can I say it right now? The Great Dictator, better than Battlefield Earth. Controversial opinion, I know, but
overall, I think that we agree that this is, you know, it's a pretty good movie. There's some it's it's over 80 years old, so it is going to show its age. So, you know, comparing it to modern films, there's going to be certain elements where it's lacking. I actually would probably, if I was trying to be really critical of this film, I think pacing would be my biggest complaint too. But given its historical significance and the fact that it holds up so well despite that, you know, definitely big props to this movie.
yeah. And even like when things are different, perhaps maybe even for the worse, like say in terms of pacing and the film length, it's still just, in my personal opinion, interesting to just watch an older film and just see like how it was different back in the day. It's like, oh, all right.
There are moments in this movie where you can tell that, like, because this is Charlie Chaplin's first talkie, so there's moments where you can tell he kind of reverted back to the silent film,
the tramp character. Yeah,
right?
kind of
the haircut or the shaving scene.
Yeah, the scene where he just shaves a man to the entirety of Hungarian Dance Number 5.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing, like all like 2.5 minutes, and it has nothing to do with the rest of the movie. But
I love
that. Yeah.
But okay, so we agree it's a good movie. What do you guys, you know, what do you think that this political message is as relevant? That, I mean, it's hard to say it's just as relevant as it was in 1940. I think that's a little ridiculous to say, but you know, how relevant do you think this movie is in kind of modern times?
So
another Charlie Chaplin movie.
Let me talk about the speech for a second.
I
think, yeah, because certainly this whole film is a satire, right? But it's also a film that I feel like doesn't actually really get to what it really wants to say until that speech. It makes fun of the situation that it is occurring, but it doesn't provide a solution, or it doesn't provide the alternative until this final speech, this famous final speech at the end. And it is my favorite part because it's still extremely powerful. I think it's the quality of the speech at this end. It has the same emotional impact as, or maybe even better emotional impact than comparable speeches in drama and film, such as "This Day We Fight" from Return of the King. I even think it compares. It like stacks up to like Band of Brothers and Henry V. It's like, I think it's a great moment, and I kind of want to talk about, I guess, the recent events that Braden has helpfully explained to us in terms of this speech, because the entire time the setup for the speech is that we see this dictator who's enamored with the idea that the world will submit to him. Like eventually, like he'll control the whole world. The world will think he's a god, and will just do.
Yeah, there's the very famous globe scene.
Yes, right. And so the speech is just a direct rebuttal of that by stating that the two things that make us humans, that make that appeal to our humanity, are liberty and love for one another, right? And this is as opposed to being a machine, right? Like just kind of fitting into the rule that this dictator has imagined for you, and which is specifically lacking in the liberty and lacking in that empathy / love, right? And so I think one of the things that made this recent riot at the Capitol so terrible is that not necessarily because it was a riot, but rather because it was a riot in the service of seizing power in the name of an ideology or like a figure, right? And so I've been really annoyed with some whataboutism I've heard from like social media that kind of compares these to like the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer. Like these are comparable, but they're completely the opposite, because those protests are about gaining recognition. It's about serving empathy, right? Whereas these riots are about stifling recognition of other people, the recognition of other people who voted, the recognition of people who aren't white if you're a neo-Nazi at this riot, and so it's completely the opposite. And so I felt like this whole movie was really relevant to what's going on.
Yeah, another thing about the I don't want to, because I don't know if it says related to the movie as the point you just made, but another thing that bothers me about the BLM and this comparisons is that let's just be ultra charitable and say that, like, you know, there are all these bad actors in the BLM who are looting and things, right? The difference between those people and the people who broke into the White House is that the looters are a unfortunate consequence of BLM, right? It's not the point. The point of BLM was not to loot. The point is not to steal the TV, right? If someone is taking advantage of the situation and doing that, that's unfortunate, but that's not what BLM is about. Overturning democracy is the point. It's the reason that these people came to the Capitol. And I do want to be, I understand that they think that they are protecting it. I think that's very, very short-sighted. Even if you believe that there was massive election fraud, which we all know there wasn't, but even if you believe that, the solution is not to then give the vice president almost dictatorial power to overturn state electors. Like, that is so, even if you think the government, you know, if there was like this mass conspiracy, that is still like the most horrible plan you could have, because it gives the government dictatorial power to overturn elections whenever it wants. Then, you know, what happens when the other side has a vice president and doesn't like the election results? You know, and they just it doesn't matter if it gets thrown out in court. Doesn't matter if the states recount the vote. None of that matters. The vice president said it, so that's who's going to choose the election. It's just so absurd, and just so misguided. Anyway, that a bit of a tangent.
No, and speaking of parallels between the film and current events, I'm probably going to sound a bit cynical here. I'll try not to be too much of a doomer, but the ending monologue is fantastic, very well written, very wonderfully performed by Chaplin himself in the film. But I kind of remember while watching it, thinking maybe if it was a little naive, because he's kind of mentioning, you know, aspects like camaraderie and coming together, and like it came to me as kind of like all you need is love. And it's these days the US, it's so divided, it seems just so split, and the cynic in me is like, well, good God, like, how do you, like, it's easy to say like, oh, we just all need to get together and we can overcome this, but then you look at the situation, it's like, man, how do you start doing that? But at the same time, just saying it's like, oh, give up, can't do that, is of course no help either. So I mean, I guess I was just wondering like how much water this speech could hold in our times, because back in the day, I'm like you said earlier, we didn't quite know the extent of the horrors of the Nazi regime.
Quick aside, Charlie Chaplin himself.
He said that if he had known like the full extent of the horrors of like concentration camps and everything, he said he wouldn't have made the film. And so, but I'm guessing back in the day, most people in the U.S. Weren't supporters of Hitler. I don't actually know. I don't know the data on that, but I don't think
I mean, this is like right before we got into World War II.
Yeah, this was before the U.S. was
right before.
Right.
So I imagine that you know, I hope there wasn't too many Nazi supporters in the States. I'm sure there were some, but
based on my very, very limited knowledge of history, I get the impression that like there wasn't a big percentage of the population that was supporters of the Nazis. Whereas, once again, I'm not trying to call these people Nazis, but like there's a surprising amount of people who like believed in like voter fraud or like that got as much traction as it did seems almost.
Yeah, there's a famous quote. I can't for the life of me remember who it's by, but it said, "When fascism comes to America, it'll be wrapped up in the American flag." And I think that is the key distinction here, is that, you know, you can't, fascism and nationalism, you know, name a better duo kind of thing. And so like it's hard to get excited about someone talking about how great Germany is as an American, right? Like, are you going to get excited about that? You need the American equivalent.
Yeah, I think it's true that because one of the key ideas that they were kind of conveying is like democracy is mentioned over and over in the speech, and throughout the film, the opposite of democracy, eliminating democracy, is often referred to, right? But the reality is that liberty is a stretchy concept. What is liberty in the minds of one person could be different from others, and you may think you're defending it. You know, and so it's true that in our current context, like you can kind of co-op almost any message and make it fit the way you want to make it fit. But I do think that there is a statement at the heart of this film that isn't really as much up for interpretation, which is this idea that like your bully, like demagogue figure that you're following is like that action is not a worthwhile action to take. It always comes at the expense of good things, right? Or better things, like empathy, etc. And I think that you can't. It's hard to argue against this this demagogue figure in our current times. Like, this was spurred on by our current president, Donald Trump, and they were doing it. They came to the Capitol in order to put him into power, right? And I think that's a message that is kind of airtight a little bit. Like, always, you don't just follow blindly. Don't follow the leader, you know?
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's significant, you know, thinking about the movie, that there was never, like, the main character was not the anti, I want to say the character, damn, I keep forgetting it. Himmler.
He wasn't the anti-dictator.
Right, he wasn't a leader who.
He was like, just some dude trying to like get on with his life and like not get like harassed.
Yeah, like he wasn't like this person organizing this giant resistance, and so you needed to look up to him as like he's the figure, and like, you know, it was more, yeah, exactly, just like he's like a normal guy who's just trying to go along to get along, for the most part, but just has like empathy for his human, you know, fellow beings. And I think there's something that's significant about that. Again, you could, you know, all you need is love kind of thing. But, you know, as naive as that take can be, because you probably need more than love sometimes, it's if we all had enough love, you probably wouldn't. Like that's kind of.
I mean, yeah, it's more inspiring than like going like, well, everything's fucked. Let's give up. Like, let's just throw in the towel, guys.
Now, if there was more empathy, and you know, to that end, I want to say that all of the people, it amazes me how people on the right are so unempathetic to their own people, right? Like they're immediately Trump threw him under the bus. Like, can you imagine that? Like your life is ruined, right? Like you've paid for a flight ticket. You've been like talking up Trump for you know, years now, and then you get a plane ticket to put him into power into DC, and then you stormed the Capitol. Trump gives you a little thing about like, yeah, we're gonna go to the Capitol. You're all special people, and you know you're all pumped up. And then as soon as things go a little sideways politically, like it starts looking bad, Trump's like, oh, but I don't condone any of the violence. And all of the Republicans that have been on your team, you know, are all like, yeah, lock them up. Like this is not. Now they're bad. But the election was still rigged, by the way. So you know what you were doing was a righteous cause, but you know we want to put you in jail anyway. What a horrible, horrible thing. And that's not to get rid of any personal responsibility of these people. I mean, obviously.
Ideally, that would be a wake-up call, like maybe a splash of water in the face, so like gets you back into reality again.
But anyway, I guess that's our thoughts on this very classic old movie / our thoughts on the recent events. Given that we mentioned Hitler and Nazis in this conversation, YouTube is definitely not going to promote this content, which is where most of our viewers are. So if you liked this, give it a like, give it a subscribe, because we're not going to get viewers otherwise, probably on this one. But
hashtag YouTube can't handle the truth.
But anyway, thank you for listening. We will probably have another episode for you around the end of the month. Now that we're on this twice a month kind of cadence. So yeah, thank you. Until next time.
Until next time, everybody. Love your neighbor.